Okay, you guys, buckle up. Because this story we just dove into, oh man, Surprise Party Gone Wrong doesn't even begin to cover it. We're talking like creature feature, legendary monster stuff.
And then, days later, another twist comes out of nowhere that'll leave you scratching your head.
Yeah, you're not kidding. It's wild. Today we're going deep on the supposed giant snake attack. And what's so crazy is we're working straight from the police statements. You know, the first-hand accounts. No filter.
Exactly. We've got Matthew Pollock's statement. He's the guy who first reports this thing. And let me tell you, he's practically coming apart at the seams when he gives it. Then we get his sister Pamela's side of the story. And as we'll see, hers is a little different. And then, just when you think you've got a handle on things, bam! 3 days later, a guy named Joshua Kane walks in with a statement that's like something out of a whole other dimension. It's nuts. The thing that jumps out at you right away, the tone of these first reports. I mean, you've got Matthew, his language is almost mythical, you know, he jumps straight to the unbelievable. And then you've got Pamela. She's clearly shaken, don't get me wrong, but her version is more grounded, you know, more realistic. So in this deep dive, our job is to unpack these crazy stories. We got to find the facts, the stuff the police were told, and then we try to figure out what really happened that night and in the days after. Just going by what's in these statements.
Back to the beginning. It all starts when Matthew comes barging into the police station. And like I said, the guy is barely holding it together. He's rambling on about this giant snake. And get this, he calls it a kaiju, straight up. Now, for those of you who don't spend their weekends watching monster movies, kaiju usually means those skyscraper-sized creatures from, you know, Japanese cinema.
Like Godzilla. Right. And that word, kaiju, it's huge. It tells you so much about what Matthew must have been seeing, or at least what he thought he was seeing. Like, his brain couldn't even process it. It was so out there, so far beyond normal that he had to reach for, like, a fictional framework.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Is he describing what he actually saw, or is his mind messing with him because of the trauma, making him think of these crazy movie monsters?
And the police. They're just, well, the report makes them sound super calm. Officer Bolton, the guy taking the statement, he offers Matthew a tissue, gets him a chair. You know, standard cop stuff, but
Yeah.
Can you imagine what must have been going through his head?
Yeah.
Then Pamela shows up. And she's a whole different story. If Matthew is frantic, Pamela is, well, the report says she looked dazed, like she was moving in slow motion, almost lumbering. Yeah, that difference right there and how they're acting, that's important, right? Pamela being all slow and dazed, maybe that's her way of dealing with shock. Maybe it hits her later. Or maybe she's just having trouble processing the whole thing compared to Matthew, who's just letting it all out right then and there. It definitely makes you think they might remember things a little differently.
And the differences, they pop up before we even get to the snake part. I mean, Matthew.
Yeah.
In his statement, he's really worried about Officer Bolton writing down the stuff he said about Marcia Kramer. Marcia's Pamela's best friend, by the way. He calls her a pain in the neck, actually, he says, an irritation, like a rash. And then he just goes off on this whole tangent about her. It's like high-pitched baby voice, horrific halitosis. I mean, he just goes on and on.
Right, and you might think, who cares, right? Why is he even bringing this up? But it actually tells us something about Matthew, you know, his personality. Even when he's in the middle of this crazy situation, he's hung up on these little things, these annoyances. He wants them in an official police report about a monster snake attack. I mean, that's a certain kind of person, right? Maybe someone who gets bothered easily by, like, surface stuff. And if that's the case, could that affect how he sees things, how he describes what happened?
Yeah, it makes you think. So here's the setup. It's Pamela's birthday, and Marcia, bless her heart, is throwing her a surprise party at the beer garden. Matthew's job is to get Pamela there without her knowing anything. Problem is, he needs a gift. Greg, their friend. He suggests they look into Pamela's past for inspiration, which leads them to this old photo album and a mixtape with Bailey Barr's Sugar and Spice and everything nice on it. And of course, Matthew has to chime in with how much he can't stand Bailey Barr, calling him an arrogant little brat with zero talent.
And those little details, they're going to be important later on, especially that song on the mixtape. Remember that. And again, Matthew. Judging Marcia, judging Bailey Barr, it's all part of that same pattern, right? Always got an opinion. Makes you wonder if he saw what he saw because of, like, how he already felt about things.
Yeah, good point. Okay, so the plan is that Pamela's husband is working late. Very convenient. Matthew picks her up, and she's already feeling a little bummed. You know, birthday girl. And her husband's not even there. Maybe Matthew's trying to avoid awkward conversations or keep the surprise a secret, because he cranks up the radio, like blasts it.
Right. And that loud music, that's something Pamela mentions in her statement.
Yeah.
It's one of those little things that don't quite match up between their stories. You can almost see it, can't you? Pamela's feeling down, Matthew's tense, trying to keep everything under wrap.
They get to the beer garden. Parking lot is jammed. They end up parking way out by the trees. It's kind of dark over there. They get out of the car, and they both hear this sound, like a groan coming from the woods. Matthew's like, meh, probably just some drunk people. But Pamela, she's not so sure. And that's where things start to get really crazy. Matthew, for some reason, decides he's got to check it out. So he goes walking towards the trees.
This is a big moment in the story because it's where Matthew and Pamela's experiences split. He goes off into the dark. She stays closer to the car where it's safer. That difference, how far they are from what's happening, it's probably the way they remember things a little differently, right?
Matthew says he walks like maybe 10 feet into the bushes, and then he sees it. Greg, sticking out of the mouth of this thing, this giant snake. He describes it all, really graphic. Greg's legs are stuck in the snake's jaws, and you can see his feet like pressed against the inside of its head. It's awful. Matthew just grabs Greg's arm and starts pulling, yelling for Pamela to help. Pamela! She grabs Matthew by his jeans and pulls too.
The words Matthew uses, ma, wedged, bulging. It's so intense. And Pamela, grabbing his jeans. The report says the waistband and belt loops, that's specific, you know. It makes it feel real, like you can picture them pulling, desperate.
And then Matthew says he hears this sound. He says he'll never forget it. It's Greg's bones crunching. He says it sounded like a bag of pretzels. And that's when he knows they're not going to get him out. It's hopeless. He lets go. They both fall back, scramble to their feet, and run into the bar. And inside, everyone's yelling, surprise! No clue what just happened outside.
Yeah, that crunching sound, oh man, that just makes it so much more real, so much more horrible. It's like you can hear it, and then they run into the party. It's so messed up. This happy surprise party right after this awful thing, it's surreal.
Okay, now let's hear what Pamela says. She starts by talking about how bummed she was that her husband wasn't there, working late. So right off the bat, she's feeling down, it's her birthday, and her husband's not even there. And she also mentions the loud music in the car. She says it was giving her a headache. And she even admits she thought something was up. Like, maybe Matthew was planning something more than just drinks.
Which is interesting, right? Because she's already, like, on alert, suspicious, before they even get to the beer garden. Maybe that affects how she sees what happens next.
She hears that weird cry from the woods. Her first instinct, to help. She sees Matthew pulling on Greg, trying to get him away from the snake. But here's the thing. She never actually says she saw the snake swallow Greg. Just that Matthew was trying to get him free from its jaws.
Right. That's a big difference, right? Matthew describes the whole swallowing thing. Pamela, she sees what happens after. Matthew pulling on Greg, trying to free him. Maybe she was a little behind Matthew, you know? Or maybe they were just looking from different angles. It was dark, things were crazy, who knows?
She calls the creature a mutant serpent. And she even thinks for a second that she's in a Godzilla flick. Which is kind of funny, right? Because Matthew called it a kaiju, and now she's comparing it to another giant monster movie. But she does back up Matthew's story about pulling on his jeans. Again, that detail about the pants is the same in both statements. But she says she lost her grip. And then, this is chilling, she says she saw Greg's body moving inside the snake. As if it were trying to squeeze an obstruction down to its tail, is how she puts it.
Mutant serpent, it's still this huge, unnatural thing, right? And Greg's body moving inside it, just makes it real. And her losing her grip, it just adds to the whole, like, helplessness of the situation. They couldn't do anything. This thing was just too powerful.
So there you have it. Two terrifying stories. Some parts are the same, some parts are different, and you're probably thinking, it can't get any weirder than this, right? Wrong. 3 days later, Joshua Kane walks into the police station. And his story, it takes this whole thing to a whole other level of bizarre.
Oh yeah. Joshua Kane's statement. It connects this crazy snake attack to, well, it's almost impossible. It doesn't even seem possible. But here we go. He starts by talking about how he always checks his pole skimmer every day. And one day, about a year ago, he finds a little snake in it.
He decides to keep it. Name's Zach. And he's super careful with this snake, like really dedicated. Starts off in a fish tank. Then Zach gets bigger, so it's a custom terrarium. And then Zach keeps growing. So Joshua remodels his patio room, which is right next to his kitchen, by the way, just to make a bigger enclosure for this snake. And he goes into a lot of detail in his statement about how secure the doors to this patio room are.
The way he describes all this, all the details about the enclosures, it does make him seem credible at first, right? Like, he put a lot of effort into taking care of this snake, not just some random pet.
And then this is where it gets crazy. Joshua's out in his garden, and he hears the patio door slam shut. Probably the wind. He goes to check on Zach. Snake's fine. But he also finds this. Calls it a dried pancake of vomit with something stuck to it.
Dried pancake of vomit. It's so clinical the way he says it. And what he finds next, oh boy.
Joshua Kane shows the cops 2 Ziploc bags. One has a cassette tape in it, the other a human toe. Yep, a toe. And he just says real calmly, this was what he expelled.
I mean, a human toe in a snake's vomit, that's wild enough, right? But then the cassette tape, that's what really blows your mind.
Because remember, Matthew said he gave Greg that old mixtape of Pamela's with sugar and spice and everything nice on it. He even said Greg put it in his shirt pocket right before they left.
Exactly. That same tape, the one that belonged to Greg, it's in Joshua Kane's snake's puke. It's just too much of a coincidence.
So let's take a step back, okay? Deep breath. What do we have? We have Matthew. Says his friend was eaten by a giant snake. We have Pamela. Saw a huge, weird snake and Greg's body inside it. And then days later, out of the blue, we have Joshua Kane. Human toe and a very specific cassette tape in his pet snakes. Leftovers.
It's like a puzzle, right? And the pieces, they fit. But how? How did Joshua Kane's pet snake get to the beer garden? Was it really a giant snake? A kaiju? A mutant serpent? Or was it just a really big pet snake that got loose somehow? And the biggest question of all, how did Greg's tape end up inside this snake?
So many questions, right? And that's what's so fascinating about this whole thing. These 3 stories, they're all connected somehow. But how? Is there a logical explanation? Something we're missing? Or is this something else? Something we can't even explain? What other crazy possibilities could link these people and this horrifying event in that dark parking lot? I don't know about you, but my head is spinning. I hope you guys are as hooked on this as we are. It's a real head scratcher.